Fintech Chatter TV. Presented by Tier 1 People. Leaders in Fintech Executive Search. Welcome to Fintech Chatter. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins. And in today's episode, I'm joined by James Fuller, the CEO and co-founder of Hnry. Hnry brings self-employment into the 21st century, taking care of your tax compliance. Hnry were winners this year's Finnies People's Choice Award, capping off a remarkable 5 years since they launched in 2017. James shares the unique journey he and his wife and co-founder Clare have been on, building a successful fintech in New Zealand from the humble beginnings of an Excel spreadsheet. But before we chat to James, make sure you give us a like and a subscribe. And if you're listening on the podcast, give us a follow and leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It really helps us in promoting great founders like James and the Aussie fintech ecosystem. And before we launch into today's show, I just want to give a shout out to Sky Suite Sydney, where I record the shows. They're not sponsors, they just do an incredible job of looking after me when I'm staying in Sydney on business. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
So Hnry, you were recently recognized as the People's Choice Award winners at this year's Finnies, so a huge accomplishment. We had a chat earlier this year, I think in May, as part of that competition. And it was such a great chat that, kind of regardless of whether you'd have won or not, we kind of committed to doing a longer discussion.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, because this is something like a 6,000 kilometer round trip to make this happen in person. But before we kind of get into things, do you want to tell the subscribers a bit about Hnry and what you do?
Sure. So Hnry is Australasia's fastest growing accountancy. We are a digital accounting service that specializes in sole traders. So we take care of sole traders' tax payments, their lodgements. We give them tailored software and expert support, all on a pay-as-you-go basis. So that means that sole traders can focus on working on their business rather than in their business. So we saving them time, money, and hassle, and kind of revolutionizing the way that sole traders go about managing their financial admin.
Cool. So when you say sole traders, you're talking about tradies, you're talking about gig workers, where do you focus?
The full spectrum. So gig workers, people who run e-commerce stores, real estate agents, tradies, graphic designers, literally you name it. We've got those people using our service. So I don't think a week goes by when a new industry pops up that we've not really come across. Like dog walkers, for instance, are pretty big right now.
Wow. Dog walkers.
All sole traders. They've got to pay the tax somehow. Gone are the days when you can get away with doing cashies.
No, I try not to have favorites, but I was really pleased when you did win. I think because, and I said this at the time when we recorded the podcast, one, I love a great bootstrap story, but two is the kind of origins of the business were an Excel spreadsheet.
Remind me, I've still got the PTSD from spreadsheet land. Yeah.
And I just found it was just such an awesome story of, how kind of from humble beginnings, you can then grow on and to get that recognition, which if you look at the previous two winners, Up and Airwallex, right? So you kind of in amongst that company. I just thought it was such a kind of awesome accolade, but also just kind of great honor for the legacy of the business. So I'd love to kind of talk a bit more about those early days and how you got the idea for it and how you got Hnry off the ground.
Yeah, sure. This dates back to probably about 2015. So my co-founder and I we'd just come out of salaried work, both taken on contracts. So I was doing some work in user experience with a bank and Clare was working in government. And we'd never been self-employed before, but it's that feeling when you suddenly realize what all these things you don't know. You're like burdened by all of this hassle. You've got tax payments, you've got an old school accountant that signs you up for some enterprise accounting software and they're like, okay, come to my training course. I'll teach you how to use this. And you're like, I'm a user experience designer. I don't want to have to run a business. I'm doing one invoice a month. And we were just like, it was classic. There's got to be a better way, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be a better way of doing this. And so we couldn't find anything out there. And we did what a lot of people do, which is we just put together a couple of spreadsheets. We said, okay, we'll put a spreadsheet together. It's going to work out how much tax we're going to need to set aside. And we existed like that for a good couple of years, no intention of starting a business. And it was only when some friends of ours came out of salaried work and they said, well, what do you guys do? This is painful. And we said, well, we've got these couple of spreadsheets. Do you want to use them? And so they started using them, and then they told some friends who told some friends. And by this time, I'd started to do some work in the startup community. And we sat down and we said, hang on a minute, maybe we're not the dumb ones here. Maybe we've got an idea. So we spun up a one-page website and we put $100 behind a Twitter ad campaign. And it was probably the most clickbaity ad you've ever seen in your life. And yeah, to our surprise, people signed up, and they went through a whole lot of friction to sign up. They had to print off, sign, scan, and return 2 different government documents just to get access to the service. But they did, and they paid 3 times as much as they do today. And these people, the pain was so great of having to deal with tax payments and filings that they would have walked over hot coals to get it. And so, we really knew that we had something, and we didn't really know quite how big it was until probably early 2018, where we kind of formally launched. And things have just grown extremely, extremely quickly since then.
It's such an amazing story. And I think, the lesson in it is that when you find a need, that rather than a want or what you hope people might need, how, as you pointed out, that they're prepared to, go through the pain of, and the bad user experience and the friction and all of that stuff. Yeah, right. But they're prepared to do it when you're solving a real pain point and a real, and you're helping someone. What did you kind of take from that lesson that then helped you get to the next stage? Because I would assume that when you start to get responses to the Twitter ad, it was saying, oh, how do we do this? Oh my God, we've got this.
I remember, and I can't remember whether we talked about this in the last podcast, but it's one of my favorite stories. So Clare and I, we're married, by the way. I don't know whether I went through that in our previous story. So my co-founder and I are married. We were on holiday in...
How do you get away with calling your wife your co-founder?
I think she prefers co-founder to wife at this stage. So we were on holiday with it was just our one daughter at the time. And shortly before we went on holiday, this is back in the real bootstrapping days where everything was done manually. I had that classic startup idea around our pricing. I said, what we need is 3 different pricing models. You've got like the entry level and the medium and then the extremely expensive, but the middle one's the most popular. I was like, this is great price anchoring. This is what all the big boys do. You have 3 packages and this one's the most popular. And so we didn't have a whole lot of functionality to put into an expensive price model. So I just made stuff up. And I thought, well, it's just, this just because no one's going to take it. It was like we were going to charge people like 6% of their income or something like that. Our usual plan cost was, it was 3%. We now charge 1%. So that's how much people were paying. But I put together this 6% plan thinking, this is going to be so expensive that no one's ever going to touch it. And I think it included things like invoice factoring and, I don't know, we'll come around your house and deliver your money personally. I don't know what it was. But we were away on holiday and someone signed up for the 6% plan. And I turned around to Claire and I said, oh, crap. And I said, what are we going to do now? Like, we don't have any of this functionality. The Twitter ad has responded in someone saying, yes, I want all of those things. And she said, well, you're going to have to tell them that we don't have that plan. I thought, well, this is awkward. So they'd obviously signed up with their phone number. So I gave the guy a call. We were away somewhere and I gave him a call and I basically downsold him onto the 3% plan to say, no, you don't want the 6% plan. That's not for you or whatever. So basically kind of talked myself out of a sale. But it was one of those classic moments when it was then that we realized that nobody needs 3 pricing plans. What our customers want is actually just simplicity.
Yeah.
Take it away, do it for me. And so we ended up, at the time we decided on a 3% pricing model. We've now gone down to 1%. So we literally slashed our prices back in 2018. Again, which much to the surprise of our customers who said, I've never been with a service that has literally just dropped their price by so much. But I think the thing that we learned, back to your question, is number one, listen to the customers, but also you've got to have that integrity. You've got to actually be honest with the customers. And when we dropped our prices from 3% to 1%, we contacted our customers and said, it didn't feel right. We weren't providing enough of a service to justify 3%.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, it's 1% and we're going to cap it every year. So now our cap is $1,500 a year. So that's all your accounting, all of your payments, all of your software, unlimited support, all rolled in. And it felt so much nicer to be able to offer something at a price point that felt fair.
Yeah.
And, we didn't want to be one of those businesses where you were kind of seeing how much you can get away with. And so you learn by basically downselling your customers when you've overextended.
It's kudos as well to the strength of the product and the problem that you're solving. This game that I'm in, recruitment, right? I often have had so many debates around, hey, why doesn't the industry shift to more of a kind of sports or talent management model where the talent pays part of their salary, right? And the reality is nobody's giving away any of their salary, right? Even if you find them a job, then they're not going to, the expectation is that, the employer will bear that cost. So the fact that you were able to, with an unproven product, be able to charge 3% of somebody's income.
Oh, it just shows how bad the problem was, right?
Yeah.
This is years of sort of systematic, difficulty that sole traders have had. And sole traders were just like Clare and I when we started. They were expected to, basically do their own books. I remember we used to have our old school accountant who's is a good friend of mine, but that thing where you become self-employed and you wonder which one of your friends is an accountant, and then you ask around and you go, yeah, I thought so. And so we registered with him, lovely guy, but there was that moment where at the end of the financial year, he would literally print off the reporting software that we were using, the accounting software. He would print it off and hand it to me, and he'd go, does this look right to you? Can you initial each page and give it back? And I would say, well, hang on a minute, isn't that your job? And he said, well, no, all year you've been reconciling your transactions, you've loaded in your expenses. I just need you to, confirm that this is all correct. And I sat there, I was like, I'm literally staring at like a wodge of 25, 30 pages going, I'm about to outlay, I think it was probably about $1,500 that I was going to pay the guy for the year. I've done all the work. I've reconciled all the transactions. He's come to me and asking for my signature and whether I think it's correct. And I just thought, what am I paying for?
Yeah.
And that was the kind of genesis for Hnry, is actually, how do we change the nature of the accounting service that sole traders get so that it actually benefits them? And it's not about, how much can we gouge this sole trader for because we can get away with it. It's actually going, well, how do we put in place fair pricing that gives an opportunity for anyone to earn independently? And, it's always an interesting thing when you come at an industry from the outside, like Clare and I did. We're not trained accountants, but we just saw basically people being ripped off. And that's where we're at today, is that, lots of people are being ripped off. And I talked to a hairdresser the other day that was being charged $5,000 for their annual income tax return.
Wow.
But it's the Wild West. And what we bring is a bunch of standardization, huge value add on top of what you're getting elsewhere. So actually, we really stand by the pricing model and the service model because it's genuinely helping people.
Now, I guess, the launch of the business has coincided with this huge shift that we've seen, and kind of work practices and working life particularly over the last 2 years. I would argue that the change was already happening well before COVID anyway. What kind of impact has that had on the Hnry business? And have you seen a significant increase in business and people moving to this kind of sole trader model and becoming self-employed? We hear a lot about the Great Resignation, for example, and I do question whether it's actually a thing or not.
Well, I think, you're quite right. I mean, we've always seen that this has been happening for a number of years, which is, more digital economies. It's people taking a bit more control over how and from where they're earning. But COVID certainly accelerated things. And what we saw was actually some traditional industries really had to sort of, I suppose, pivot quite quickly. And you don't usually associate people pivoting with more kind of traditional sole trader industries. But if I think about, I'll use my mum as an example. Back in the UK, so she does a Zumba class once a week in person. She goes down with all of her friends and they do a Zumba class. But obviously COVID hit, lockdowns, that class can't be in person. But the instructor, as with a lot of people in that industry, had to very quickly pivot and said, actually, I'm going to move my classes online. But by doing so, they actually increase their earning potential, because suddenly, rather than having to rent the church hall and you can only put 10 people in it, you can do a Zoom class to 20 people concurrently and everyone stays in their homes. Yeah. So for the personal trainer, for the instructor, the overheads are significantly reduced. Everyone still gets that kind of sense of community, and then they're all there together. And so quite a few industries really pivoted very quickly to embrace the kind of impact that COVID had on their businesses and their ability to earn. And so we saw a lot of that throughout kind of 2020 of industries, people diversifying their income streams in a way that we hadn't seen before. So people who'd been sort of, let go from what used to be called permanent employment. We prefer the term salary because, there's no such thing as a permanent job as COVID showed us. These people kind of basically got turfed out of jobs they'd been in for a number of years. And a lot of them sat there and said, well, perhaps I've had all my eggs in one basket. I've had one employer. I basically hitched myself to one horse, and maybe that's not the right way to go about things. And so these were people who took control of how they earned, and they said, I'm going to have multiple income streams. I'm going to try, as a sole trader, I'm going to try and earn in a few different ways. And it's a way of, we kind of talk about that portfolio careers idea. It's a way of people really indulging portfolio careers and saying, I'm a real estate agent that's also going to drive Uber. And it's about de-risking the way that you earn. And, having Hnry at that point, it was a way of people further de-risking it. They said, actually, I can have a drop shipping business. I can do graphic design. I can do web work. And I don't have to worry about the compliance mess that I would have had to previously because Hnry takes care of all of that. And so what we saw was the kind of acceleration of portfolio careers, of digital working in a way that kind of encouraged people to actually look at other avenues and sort of we were there, we very much benefited from people going down this road because they needed a way of sorting all of that income, all of that client management, and a right place at the right time. But we've actually seen a continued growth of that, well after COVID restrictions eased. So, we're not one of these businesses that sort of saw a spike during COVID and then it all went away. And, looking at Zoom's share price, it's kind of back where it was two odd years ago. For us, actually, revenue growth, customer growth has been consistent since all the way back in 2018. What we just saw in COVID was just things got faster. And since COVID, it's got faster still.
Now, alluded to this earlier around your round trip. This is another really cool thing about Hnry is that your HQ is in Wellington, New Zealand.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Sunny Wellington, as we call it.
So you don't sound like a Kiwi. How did Wellington become home?
So I'm originally from London, from southeast of London, and Clare and I met over there. We were both working for, I'm just actually reflecting on it now. We've had a pretty glamorous career. So now we run a tax business, but back then we met and we were working at a company that makes address software. So, we've hit all the high notes of glamour jobs, but we met working at an address software company in London 10, 15 years ago. And when we had our first child, London's not a great place to raise kids. And so Claire's from here originally. And so she said, look, why don't we try, the other side of the world? And me as a not very intrepid Brit said, okay, I'll give it a go for a little while. But we settled in Clare's hometown of Wellington, and just a really lovely place to be and great place to raise children. We got 2 daughters. And then obviously launching in Australia for Hnry a couple of years ago. Now Clare and I are over here, incredibly frequently. We can come over, now the borders are open. We can come over, every couple of weeks, spend some time with our team over here that's growing quite significantly. And this is sort of one of the best moves we've ever made was relocating from the UK.
Awesome. Now, it's not renowned as being a fintech hub, Wellington.
It might be.
But it might be now. Yeah, well, I guess, Xero did, apologies, Kiwi listeners. But I guess, the point being that it's, as a hub for talent and just access to capital and, just people and being around there, we're in Sydney at the minute and go around the corner at the startup hub and go and chat to anyone really. And it's kind of, just having that proximity to it. Whereas in Wellington, you haven't got that proximity. What were some of the things that you kind of found that you had to kind of really go on overextending to make the business a success because you just didn't have access to it?
I don't know. I mean, I think the access is actually phenomenal in New Zealand. I would imagine in London, the access is probably a bit harder, but in Wellington, it is phenomenal. So I actually used to work at one of the startup hubs there. So I'm well aware of the community that exists, but we would, we were based out of one of the startup hubs, went through a fintech accelerator there. The access that you get, I mean, it's very well renowned that Kiwis all know each other. So you're literally like a couple of degrees of separation from pretty much anyone.
Yeah.
as a place to be and a place to do business, you can get a meeting with pretty much anyone at any time. It's like everyone's very open and welcoming. So what we found was actually we could go and, pitch up at one of the co-working spaces and just kind of run seminars during the afternoon on contractor tax. And then we could go to one of the bigger recruitment agencies and we can get in the door to sit with the MD just because either it's a warm intro or they're just excited about the business. So I think, I again, don't have an experience of starting a business in Sydney, but in New Zealand, there is that kind of plucky nature of Kiwis of supporting each other. And actually, we found we had a lot of doors open for us.
Awesome.
Even to where we are today, which is, I had the pleasure of sitting down a couple of times in the last few weeks with the Minister for Small Business and just talking about what we do in Hnry, what we're seeing in the sole trader space. And the Minister is, incredibly excited to support businesses like Hnry that are effectively benefiting government, they're benefiting, the wider New Zealand economy. I would say if, you look at a lot of businesses and actually New Zealand is like a proving ground for businesses to refine their model and their go-to-market before they...
It's exactly what we say about Australia as well, right?
It's just a smaller proving ground, but it's, the lessons that we learned in a business in New Zealand, when we launched in Australia, the growth that we've seen over here has been phenomenal in the last 18 months and really only due to the lessons that we learned in the years we spent crafting the business in New Zealand so that we could hit the ground running here, really tailor it for the Australian market. And, the response from the customers and from the clients has just been amazing. Yeah,
fantastic. Now, the other thing that I wanted to chat with you about was, I guess, the recognition that you got this year, winning the People's Choice Award and the Finnies. How was that received in New Zealand? Because I can imagine you must have been like kind of heroes.
The New Zealand team wanted to take the trophy back. So myself and Clare were at the awards, and I went down with Karen, who's our managing director of Australia. We went and collected the award, and it's a good old weighty award. It was great. It's it's a real privilege. And there was a point at the end of the night where I think Clare and I were just about to walk off with it, and Karen said, "No, that lives in the Sydney office." It was a huge honor. And I think, so thankful to all of our customers in Australia for kind of getting us there. As you know, it was all around kind of podcast listens and votes from customers. I think we were, quite well celebrated when we got back to New Zealand because it's a big deal for us. It's as a Kiwi company that's reasonably new to the Australian market to get that kind of backing from the Aussies. It was just, fantastic.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about, I guess, the fintech scene in general. You've touched a little bit about, New Zealand. What's your sense as to kind of when you come to visit in Sydney? What's your sense as to kind of the Australian scene, and how do you think, New Zealand and Australia can kind of collaborate a bit more?
Oh, it's an interesting one. I think the scene here in Australia is. It's busy. It's another level over here. And I was saying to some of our investors, I think, the local investors here in Sydney, and I think one of the first times I came over, I was you're in a cab from the airport into the CBD, and the amount of the backs of buses that are fintech apps and the amount of ads. And I remember at the time, so a good few years ago, there was entire train station takeovers by the likes of Spaceship. And I was I think it was back in the day, they might have just raised a round. And I remember going through St. James and it was just completely purple with Spaceship. And then I got upstairs to the hotel room and I put on YouTube and the first ad that comes up is a Spaceship ad. And it was that first experience of just the sheer scale of the scene over here.
Yeah.
And that was maybe 2017, 2018.
Yeah, it would have been.
And that was massive. And I think, one of the things that's really interesting is since then, since probably 2017 onwards, we've seen some huge businesses coming out of New Zealand. So some massive raises, some big fintech businesses, whether it's the likes of Sharesies or First AML and others, where actually I think they're looking to the Australian market for investment. We were lucky enough to bring on funding from EVP, as I was saying, local VC here, and getting that Australian flavour to the sort of scale that you can achieve and the sort of things that you can do. I think there's a certain amount that we've seen in the New Zealand market that actually kind of emulates some of the size that you see here. But certainly, 4 or 5 years ago, never seen anything like it. Such a busy market in such a, variety of different verticals in the fintech space.
On the VC bit, we talked earlier about you getting product market fit really quickly. What were the discussions like with VC, going to them with something that was already proven, where you had customers and they were actually paying a fair amount of money to use the service? How did that kind of change the conversation with VC?
Well, I think it was different stages, right? When we first raised money back in 2018, all the conversations were with angel investors, and it was very much like, hey, we've got some initial revenue coming in, we've got good recurring monthly revenue coming in. But as we started to grow and you start to have conversations with VCs over in Australia, the traction and it all became about the metrics. How predictable is your customer acquisition? And at the time, and what's really interesting is you look at it now, and the kind of metrics we were measured against in the early stages were things like, what's your CAC, what's your LTV, what's your the kind of MRR growth over time. And then suddenly you find yourself, we raised around December last year, and we raised about 15 mil Australian from a US-based venture fund called Left Lane. And the sorts of things you're judged on there are, again, next level. It's more, fully grossed up customer acquisition cost when you take into account all costs to get there. Your gross margin, your CAC payback period on a fully grossed up basis, your burn multiple, like all of these new metrics come in. And so as a business, we've always been hyper efficient. We've always been focused on efficiency. We run lean deliberately because we want to be able to have sustainable growth. We don't just kind of go and hire an army of people. Yeah. We actually want to make sure we've got good long-term roadmap. But it's every turn you go and speak to a different VC, they've got a different set of metrics that they want you to look at. So now I look at the metrics that we have as a business that we consider our vitals. And then I compare them to maybe where we were in 2018, and it's just leagues in between.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you talked about scaling the business there. How many people are employed at Hnry?
Where are we now? 67, I think. So back in 2018, it was Clare and I unpaid. We're now 67 staff. I think it's 48 in Wellington and the remainder here. But we're recruiting for another 15 to 20 roles at the moment. Wow. We've just about to open a new office in Tech Central here in Sydney. Yeah. And that has capacity for 80, I think. So things filling up pretty quickly. Yeah.
What's that journey been like of scaling the business? And I'm going to ask for some tips here, because me and my wife work together, right? And, I think it's probably the reason why we've not scaled the business, because we couldn't subject other people to that.
It's just why you're in Sydney and she's in Newcastle.
Yeah, that's right. She sent me here. But look, it is something that I could imagine would be a real challenge, right? Is the stresses of a startup and growing a business and hiring people and trying to get funding, and then having the person that you kind of in your life who there's no filter between the two of you. Whereas at least you've got a co-founder that you're not married to. There's not a relationship there other than
you're
work.
Pretty much married to a co-founder. No, I mean, often this gets asked, and I think, genuinely, this business wouldn't be a success if we weren't married. I think we would have probably thrown in the towel back in 2017. I think, we had the benefit of sort of having worked in close proximity before here and there. But I think, we had to adjust. The first time sort of you disagree at work is an interesting experience, but you grow and you adjust very quickly to that. But actually, for me, it's about when you're not working together and you work in different places and you come home after a day at work and you try and describe something that's happened in your day, the other person has literally no context. They don't know who Jan is or who Fred is. They maybe met them at a Christmas party once, but they don't really know how the business works. And they can't do anything to help you. All they can do is just nod along and be a sounding board. Whereas when you have that person, when you get home and you talk about a challenge in the business, and that person can directly fix that problem or find a solution or give some advice that's directly relevant and comes with context, it's actually so much more beneficial. And genuinely, and I don't say this because my wife's probably going to watch this, but she probably won't actually. She's sick of the sound of my voice. But it's actually, I couldn't imagine running a business with just like a friend. I think that, if I think of any of my friends and you think about going into business with one of your friends, how difficult that would be, what a strain that would put on the friendship. You actually need, and certainly we found that the success has come from the fact that we have that strong bond as a relationship. And it means that we can be better as founders because actually you don't have a filter and you're going to give it to somebody straight. And if they're not doing what they should be doing, you're going to call them out on it in private, of course. But I think it's actually been a great success story. And when you look at the number of businesses out there that are husband and wife, whether they put themselves out there as a husband and wife team or whether they've used different names to try and keep things separate, there are a lot of very successful businesses that are couples who started this business themselves. And I think for Claire and I, for a while, we sort of we didn't put it out there, and we still don't kind of trade on it. We don't want to be one.
It does feel like there's some stigma attached to it, right?
There was a bit at the start when you're raising, and people kind of say, "Well, is that your wife?" And you go, "No, that's my co-founder." And we're each of us are there on merit because we have different skills. But I think actually it's really made the business so much stronger as a whole. And like I say, I think probably if I had a friend of mine and we'd put this business together, it would probably be long done by now. We'd have just, had a big argument and that would have been the end of it. But actually when Claire and I put our minds to something, it's actually a very, very powerful team. And you're probably the same situation that actually if you were trying to do this with someone else, it would be very difficult not to have that person at home actually on the journey with you. The distance you'd find between the two of you because you had, no context of what each other was actually getting up to.
Well, you talked earlier about the pricing model, right? And the integrity that you felt. And, we've got a really similar kind of ethos in our business as well. And one of the, we ain't got a mission statement other than we just want to see Australia and New Zealand punching well above its weight on a global scene. But if you talk about values, I think our value is that we're a family business, and the values of our family we want to extend to our clients and a community and a network. Things around trust and respect and relationship fairness, and fairness, right?
Fairness is a
transparency,
big driver.
right? Like I've found that they kind of, and I kind of find it quite comical, right? That we've got these kind of crying CEOs on LinkedIn the whole time, and these announcements of redundancies, and it's really hard because we're like a family, and that's not like a family, right? There's a very, very different kind of, I think there is a break off between a business and a family because you got to make decisions in a business that are just cold, hard, calculated decisions, right?
It's interesting because actually we've got a number of people who work in our business who are related. We've got siblings, a couple of pairs of siblings who work in our business. And it's funny for people to find out sort of a few weeks after they join that these people are siblings because the two of them will be kind of like bitching at each other across the office. And when somebody finally reveals that they're sisters, someone goes, "Oh, that's what that is. I thought they were just highly unprofessional." But it does have, the great thing about our business is it does have that closeness. And actually, particularly in the first, the early stages of a business, you need to feel like there's that sense of family. And even now we're kind of 60 odd people, and you really get the sense of it actually, being in the Sydney office for the first time in a little while, the sense of fun that is in that office, and I think that I can genuinely sympathize for anyone that has to make hard decisions in their business, because sometimes it's, you do have to make some very difficult decisions and you try and separate yourself from it. But I think the one thing I do love about all of our staff is actually they love working for the company and they love working with each other because it's genuinely just a fun place to work. And the amount of laughter, I mean, we had a guy manage to fall through a chair today. First thing one of our guys did, it was in a shared co-working space. First thing one of our team did, went straight to the building manager. And I was thinking, this is great. They're going to lay a complaint. No, they got the CCTV footage, put it up on the big TV, and everyone had a good laugh. So it's, it's one of those where you genuinely feel like there's affection between people. And it's a great place to work. What a great atmosphere.
Yeah. And look, it's kind of, I've had this discussion with quite a number of people around, and lots of people. It seems to be the only discussion that people want to talk about now is the whole debate about working from home, working remotely, or being in the office. And I think, for me, it's clear that, hey, I don't think I could be a good dad or I'd have a, healthy family if I was doing it, zooming in to check in on the kids and seeing them 1 or 2 days a week, right? It's pretty difficult to do. And I'm sure people would agree with that. particularly if you want to have the vibe that you've got, not every business wants to have that, but if that's what that's what you're trying to achieve, it's really difficult to do that without having a group of people just together. And those moments that you said, right? Like, that's something that creates bonds between people, right? It's like you'll be talking about it. I caught up with an old workmate and we hadn't seen each other in 12 years. And we were just talking about stuff that had happened at work in the office, right? And that bond and that friendship that had created. Yeah. And that 12 years later, we were still laughing about it. I mean, tears rolling down our eyes, laughing about something that had happened, 15, 16 years ago. Yeah. And I think that kind of, those bonds are really difficult to be able to replicate through kind of a remote thing.
And I genuinely don't think that the technology has kind of nailed it. Yeah. You see, there have been various attempts to use technology to kind of recreate this sort of virtual office environment. Yeah. But, for us, we love having people in the office. We love actually kind of our staff having the opportunity to kind of see each other in a different light. So not just at the other end of a Zoom call, but actually to see how people interact with each other, to have fun outside your own department, to go and, enjoy something that's going on physically in an environment, to stand around a whiteboard. And, we know for some people, they would prefer not to be in an office. And, I think certainly if I think about people in the UK who sometimes have 2.5 hour, 3 hour commutes, there's some productivity things there. But I think actually the benefit of being around other people and actually enjoying other people's company, it's really good for just mental health generally. And we have, I think I was saying this to you earlier, we have a new starter coming into our engineering team. And for the last 3 or 4 years, he's been working primarily remotely, just by virtue of the people he was working for, and then a little bit of COVID in between. And when we interviewed him, he just said, look, I've been doing this for 4 years now. I just want to be around people. Yeah. He said just the feeling I had of my own self-esteem, where I would wake up in the morning, wheel over to a desk, sit down, not really move for a period of time. And then I would just close up the laptop and just walk across to the other side of the room. He said, I want to be around people. Yeah. I want the vibe. I want to be in the CBD where I can actually go and do stuff and not be confined to my house. It's not, some people don't like that, but actually what we're finding is a lot of people who've done long-term remote working are actually now going, that was fun for a while, but actually I really want to be able to work around other people.
Now we're going to wrap up soon, James. You talked briefly about your growth plans. What does the next 12 months hold in store for Hnry?
So, the Australian market is the big focus for us at the moment. New Zealand is just absolutely flying for us. But, we're still relatively new to Australia. We've got some huge amounts of growth. I think last 18 months has been 25% revenue growth month on month, which has just been amazing. Wow. But it's a massive market and there's a huge amount of sole traders out there that we can help. Yeah. So, we have plans for further afield and going to other countries as well, but the Australian market is our focus. And so, as we're saying, we've got new office opening here. We've got a significant amount of hiring. So hiring across product, marketing, engineering, operations. And so it's really about making sure that we can really well serve the Australian market. I don't think we've really even scratch the surface of some industries. And whilst we're growing a lot, I think there's so much more there. It's such a core part of the Australian working economy, the Aussie battler, the sole trader. And there are so many out there that are still in that wild west of being charged $3,000-$4,000 for a tax return, where actually, there's alternatives in the likes of Hnry that can actually just do all that stuff for you and you can get your life back. So I love to say that, world domination is the next 12 months for us, but actually realistically, it's about serving this market, listening to Aussie customers, really getting it right and kind of nailing that sustainable growth.
Now we get some seriously talented people watching and listening to this show. Some of them could be potential customers of Hnry. Some of them might be interested in working with you. What's the best way for people to reach out if they're interested in joining Hnry?
So if you're interested in joining Hnry, just jump on hnry.com.au, hnry.com.au, and come and talk to one of our team. So when you jump on the live chat, that's not bots, it's not AI. Answer a couple of questions and come talk to a human. And you can find out whether Hnry is right for you.
Cool. And careers at Hnry?
Jobs at Hnry.
Cool.
Jobs at hnry.com.au. Flick us a CV. Whilst we've got some pretty defined roles out there. We're always of the opinion that we will hire good people if they make themselves available. So if you look at our careers page and there isn't a role that's immediately jumping out at you, just drop us an email to that email address and all comers considered.
Brilliant. Well, James, it's been fantastic to have you on. Thanks so much for the marriage counselling.
Anytime, that's why I'm here.
Business/marriage consultant.
That's the next business.
The slashies. It's been great to have you on. Fantastic to hear about the continued success of Hnry.
Thanks.
And mate, can't wait to speak again in another 12 months and see how things have gone for you all.
Yeah, we'd love.
Fintech Chatter TV. Presented by Tier 1 People. Leaders in Fintech Executive Search.